Okay, I'm going to break this drawing down into steps that are way easier to follow than you might imagine, so that you can have a go, create this, and amaze yourself. Okay, so as explained in the intro, I'm going to break this down into steps so that you learn not only the painting process and techniques, but also about the app that I'm using, Procreate. But that isn't to say you couldn't use a different app on a different tablet and still follow along. Having said that, within the app Procreate, I'm using their default A4 canvas, which is 297 by 210 millimeters at 300 dpi. Also, one of the default color profiles is the sRGB code, the one that ends in 2.1, and that's what I'll be using during this tutorial. I'm also using some of the default brushes that come within Procreate. So within airbrushing, I'll use the soft brush, the medium brush, and the medium hard brush. Within inking, I'll be using the studio pen. Within drawing, I'll be using an amended version of the evolve brush. I will explain that when we get to that point, don't worry. Within elements, I'll use the clouds brush. Within industrial, I'm going to use the heavy metal brush as well as the stone wall brush. And within organic, I'm going to use the rainforest brush. Now, in terms of the colors, I've pre-selected a color palette, and each of the colors within Procreate, if you go to the value section here, has what we call a hexadecimal code associated with it. Down in the video description, I've listed all of these color codes. You just need to copy and paste them into this box one at a time. Press enter one at a time, and the color will appear in this top corner, this circle. You just tap it into this color palette, and you can construct this for yourself. Or to save you some time, next to the codes in the description is also a link that takes you to my Patreon page where you can download the color file for free. And again, that just makes it a lot quicker for you. And Patreon is also the place that you can support this channel and gain access to exclusive content such as extended versions of many of these tutorials. I'd like to say a massive thank you to those people who do support me over at Patreon. It really has and continues to make a huge difference. So thank you so much. And with all of that said and done, we're going to get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate my canvas to the portrait orientation. And we've got layer 1 already. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to choose the first color on the top row. I'm just going to drag into the canvas area and it flood fills the whole canvas. Now please just be aware that the camera that I'm using and perhaps the screen that you're also using will mean that the colors that appear right now will look a little bit different on my version compared to your version. But don't worry, as long as you've got all the correct colors in terms of the color codes or the color palette, you are using the correct colors, so don't worry. It's always better to compare your version with my version I show at the very end of the video when I show a still. I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer, layer 2. I'm going to go to the elements clouds brush. I'm going to go to the third color on the top row. I'm going to put the brush size 20% and the strength of it, the opacity at 20% as well. I'm going to have a moon, possibly a setting sun, depends how you want to interpret this, in this area. And so I'm just going to start circling in, building in some texture in this area. Now we can keep it quite loose, just circle it in. You don't need to really be worrying about how you're applying it at this point, but really want it more concentrated in this kind of area. So you can go over it a few times there, circle it in, and still use until you start to build in this kind of look. Keep circling it in. We want more of a concentration here. Something like this. And I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur that in to about 5% and deselect. I'm going to go to my layers, create a new layer, layer 3, and then I'm going to go to the second color on the top row. I'm going to stay with the clouds brush within elements. I'm going to stay at 20% size and 20% strength, opacity. And then with this darker color now, we're going to introduce some variation of texture into that background green as well. We definitely want a kind of mottled look across the whole of that upper area. Again, yours probably will look a little bit different in terms of colors. Don't worry. I've noticed on the camera that the version you're watching will look brighter typically than what you've got on your iPad screen in front of you. This version looks greener and more saturated currently than it does on the camera, but that's fine. Don't panic if it looks different. Bring this across. We're probably going to divide this just below the halfway point, like that, so you can do a few bands of it there, upwards a little bit, something like this. And it can encroach upon the light texture that we've already created as well, and that's fine. Already we're starting to get some really lovely textures in there. Let's bring it a little bit further down, why not? Press on a bit more, allow it to build in down here, nothing wrong with that. So I'm going to create a new layer, layer 4. I'm going to go in with the airbrushing medium hard brush. I'm going to put it to about 12% size and 100% opacity. I'm just going to carefully go in here, tap in a few dots for what will either be a really glowing moon or a setting sun, and you can decide. Then I'm going to go to the adjustments, the bloom, and I'm just going to slide this across. Not too far. I don't want it to be completely blazing like a bright sun. I think just short of 50, so maybe about 45 is going to work nicely for us. Deselect. Go to my layers, create a new layer, layer 5. Tap on it. Clipping mask, which links it with a little arrow, and it links it to the layer underneath, which means that anything we add now is going to be restricted and only allowed to be put within the boundaries of that previous layer. So I'm going to go in again with the Elements Clouds brush, and I'm going to use the 4th color on the top row, put it down, maybe 10% size, 20% strength, and I'm just going to take away here, perhaps a little bit stronger actually, let's put it up to 50%. I'm just going to take away some of that glow a little bit. We definitely want it, but we want to contain it perhaps to just a smaller section, so maybe the details on the cloud here, fog is just obscuring it slightly more. Then we can go back to layer 3, go back to the 2nd color on the top row, and just think where the edges of that would be, and we can just continue just at the edges so it feels like it's all part of one detail that's cutting in front of it, like that. Then we're going to go to our top layer and create a new layer, layer 6. I'm going to go in with the airbrushing soft brush. I'm going to go again to the 2nd color on the top row, 2% size, 30% strength will do. And about 2/3 of the way down, we're just going to draw a line across. It's going to be quite faint. Hold it until it snaps to a straight line. Now you can continue to move it. Now if you're struggling to judge what is completely horizontal, use your other hand, put your finger down, and it snaps to that perfect horizontal line. Now if you feel like you've misjudged it, you can always go to the transform and it allows you to move that line around. That isn't a problem. I'm then going to use this brush still, perhaps just a hint down into the 1%. And then we're going to start doing some tree trunks like this, varying sizes, some short ones, some faint ones, some more distinct ones, varying them up. Don't need to do too much over at this side, but just generally over at this kind of area. Just do a few of these, a few shorter ones, almost like it creates this kind of shape. I'm then going to go to the drawing, evolve brush. Now I'm going to reset it. This is how it appears by default. Tap on it again. And we're just going to change the spacing from 24 up to something that's much more spaced apart. So maybe 60%. It's quite difficult to get the exact percentage. 61, that's fine. I don't really mind. Click done. Going to continue to use the same color, 2% size, 100% opacity, and then just pick one of these trees. Just press lightly to begin with. And it is pressure sensitive, so the lighter you press, smaller the shapes, press on more, get bolder texture. And I'm just going to kind of swing left to right, and it will enable us to start with pressure sensitivity, start creating some thinner branches at the edge by pressing on less, and then just circling perhaps for the center just to build in that area, and keep it a little bit random as well. You don't want it too uniform. Keep a little bit of chaos. Nature doesn't really have absolute uniformity, so if you find that it's getting too rigid like this, then you need to just make it a little bit more random. Introduce that chaos. Just a few random kind of blobs in the mix as well, just to make it less tidy. I like to try out different brushes. We've used different brushes to create this type of tree in the past, but this is another interesting one. It's quite an easy one. It does a lot of the work for us relatively quick. We're heading down to that horizon line, that line we've drawn. Perhaps we'll do another one over here. Not all the trees need to be as densely populated with leaves or needles, I guess, in this type of tree. You can have sections perhaps where it's just a little bit more sparse. Move over to this area. I'm going to do another tree here. And these are more like the distant trees, so we're going to do some that are a little bit closer, a darker tone, but these are ones that are going to be pushed back a little bit in a moment. It's not the only brush we're going to use either. There is a lot more green in this than it actually appears on camera, so, you know, hopefully yours will look a lot more green as well, and that is actually the look that I think works best. So if yours, you're thinking, well, why does mine look more green? Or why does yours look more green and mine looks more blue? Then I actually wanted this to look more green. So if yours looks more green, then I think that's all for the best. Then I'm going to switch brushes. I'm going to go to the organic rainforest brush. I'll just reset it to begin with. Then tap on it again. I'm going to change the spacing from 27%, and that's within stroke path, up to about 45. Click done. 3% size, 100% opacity still. And then we can just add some other more random textures, and it just blots it in. Fills in more areas more rapidly as well. We definitely want the more distinct trees in here, but then we want a general kind of ground texture in there as well. Much of this is going to be obscured by the building anyway, but we may as well just start to bring in some of this texture. Not too much though, we don't want it as high as the actual trees. We'll bring it down to that horizon line. Blot that in a little bit. Just take it this way a little bit more perhaps. Not too much. Leave a bit of a gap here. Going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and we're going to blur that in slightly to about the 3% and deselect. I feel like the whole layer needs to be made a little bit darker. Now that I see it, I'm going to go to the adjustments, hue, saturation, and brightness, and turn the brightness down 2%, so it's at 48%, and deselect. I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer, layer 7. I'm going to go to the airbrushing. I might go to the medium hard brush actually. I'm going to go for just a color that's a hint darker, so I'm going to go along to the 5th color on the middle row. You can see that's darker. 1% size. Maybe just a little bit back from 100%, so 90% strength. And maybe we'll just restate some of these tree lines that we did kind of put in there anyway. But I'll just restate them with this slightly darker colour. You can add new ones as well. It doesn't have to be necessarily going over the lines that you've already done. We definitely want some tree trunks, some kind of spindly trees that perhaps don't have any leaves on them. Looks a bit spookier, I think, if they're not all too healthy looking. Some branches that just come off of them. We could perhaps go to a different brush. We could go to the inking studio pen, put it quite low, maybe 5% size, 50% strength. We could have some more branches. And the benefit of this brush is it's pressure sensitive, so you press on hard or you press on lightly, you get a different weight of line. We can create some, you might need to zoom in just to get it a little bit more tidy. You can see when you zoom in that they're not very neat, so I'll try that again, a bit more zoomed in, be a bit more controlled. Spend a few moments just with these. I'm going to blur this layer in a little bit as well, so it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. I'm going to blur this in as well as a layer, but as long as we get the idea that there's different types of trees, some with fine branches on, I think it creates a nicer sort of variation of form. We could also go back to the drawing evolve brush, and well, and perhaps on one or two of them, perhaps we'll just put it up again. So high on the 2% size, perhaps only maybe 60% strength. One or two of them, you can just add suggestions of little bits of foliage and other things on them as well. So you're getting a mixture. Probably just put this up a little bit to 3%. Just tap it in a little bit here and there. I think variation is key for this. Layers of different textures. And then that whole layer, we're going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, blur it in, 2%, deselect. I'm going to take that layer, tap on it, merge down. So that's all in one layer now. I'm going to tap on it, put on the alpha lock. A little checkerboard should appear. That enables us to go something like the airbrush, soft brush, go to a darker color. So maybe the third color on the middle row, put it up to maybe 5% size, 20% strength. And I'm just going to start introducing just some darker tones. Again, I don't want it to appear flat in any areas. So we'll just go over that. Again, just introducing variation. Some bits are going to appear darker because of the mottled kind of atmospheric clouds and mist. This kind of changing of tone is actually going to be really useful. If it's too consistent, it's not going to look right. It's darker at the base. We're also going to have some low-lying mist, so I'm also going to add a lighter color in the bottom areas too, but just start with a slightly darker as a base. I think I want to readjust that, so I'm going to go to layers 5 and 4. So tap on layers 5, merge down onto 4, so that's now on one layer, and that means that I can go with the transform and just move it around. I'm going to move it this way a little bit. I don't quite want it in the exact center. I want it a little bit off of that halfway line, so about there I think works better. Might also go to layer 6, just turn off the alpha lock, go to the transform. I might just stretch it this way. Whoops. In fact, I'll do it on freeform. Stretch it this way. Stretch it up a little bit as well. A little bit more that way. I think I want the top of that tree to be even higher than the glowing sun or moon. So I think that works better. Deselect. Now we're going to go to the top layer and create a new layer, layer 6 again. Because we condense layers, it now is a bit confusing. So I'm going to tap on that layer, rename it. I'm going to put house. We will add other things to it. So it's not, the house isn't going to be all on one layer, but it's a good start. So I'm going to go in with the medium hard brush. I'm going to go in with the third color on the middle row, 1% size, 100% opacity. And I'm going to do a point here, close to the moon. And I'm just going to start down here. I'm going to aim towards that. And then down here, hold it until it snaps. We can go to transform, and we can, on freeform, just pinch that in however we want. I want it to be a little bit steeper, so I'll pinch it in even more. Think about there. Maybe just pinch it in and reduce the size a little bit. Whoops. Like so. I'll zoom in. Just strengthen those lines up a little bit. Then I'm going to go just indent it a little bit there and there. I'm going to come down to that horizon line, across, and then up. Hold it. And it snaps to a better shape for us. And that's all in one layer, so we should be able to just fill that in. Now, if it does that, then maybe there's an area of a gap. Try again. That's better. Now, your shape might not be perfect to this point, but I'm not going to overly worry about that. If it's a little bit wonky, then I'm not that bothered. I think it could be still okay. I'm not sure about the little dot I did to begin with, so eraser, medium hard brush, small size, 100% opacity, just get rid of that. That's fine. Back in with the brush, just join in those like so. I'm going to create a new layer, layer 7. Still going to use the medium hard brush, still going to use the third color, 1% size, and just a little bit from that corner. We're going to do a line across and then go straight down and then straight across. Hold it until it snaps to a more geometric shape. Again, if it's a little bit imperfect, it doesn't probably really matter that much. We can go to the transform, freeform, and just push that up a little bit. I think I want a bit more of a distance between there and there, maybe even a little bit more. Pinch it in a little bit though. I don't want the distance between there and there to be too enormous. Maybe something more like that. Go to my layers. If I just long press on that layer, you can see that it isolates. I'll do that again. If you go to the little tick on that layer, long press, it shows you the shape in isolation. So maybe just go and join them up, close down any gaps so you can just flood fill that. Long press and again, it puts everything back. Now I want that layer to be slightly differentiated from the other layer. So I'm going to tap on the N and just dial that back to maybe 95%, and it's just enough. You can just see now that actually it's separated from that shape and you can see it better. We're going to create a new layer, layer 8, and we're going to do something very similar over at this side. So I'm going to start a little bit higher up from this point across. We're going to go across and then down, join it back up. Remember, this time we may as well just try and close it up, hold it. I don't really care about that bottom line. It's more this edge that I'm concerned about. As long as it works roughly up there, then I can flood fill. It's going to slider. There'll be somewhere along that slider that it flood fills in a way that works. Again, we're going to go to the N and just dial it back a little bit to the 95%. And again, it's just allowed us to see this structure a little bit more than those. I don't care about the bottom edge. We're going to fix that. Now I'm going to go back to layer 7. Same brush, same settings. I'm just going to extend this out a little bit till it snaps to a straight line. And then I'm just going to get a bit of an angle like this. I want another section of roof to kick out here. And then from that corner, just hold it, bring it in till it snaps to another straight line, and just move my hand so you can see that. We want that roughly horizontal like that. Just fill that in. Maybe there's another little section, something else that kicks out here. Just another detail. And, you know, we can go along the edge, just make it slightly less perfect as well. Just think it's an old structure. It's going to have little bits of mortar or brick or just imperfections that cut along that. So just make it less tidy. And we'll probably need to do the same up here as well. Tiles on the roof that have become damaged, a bit less neat looking. Same along this line. Make it look a bit more organic, a bit more weathered. And then I'm going to move over this side, do pretty much the same thing. So we'll go to that layer, layer 8. Again, from this corner, hold it till it snaps. That will do. And then back in, hold it till it snaps. Set that line and just fill it in. Again, we don't want it to be too perfect. Just rough it up slightly. Let's not be over the top with that, but just a little bit. I'm going to turn that down even lower on the 1%. We'll do a little chimney here. So do a rectangle best you can. Hold it. It should snap to a straight line. That's good enough. Fill it in. Add a little kind of collar at the top. And then maybe there's just more for the back of the roof detail here. Something like that. I'm going to, a little bit down from here, just bring a line across. Hold it. Find the angle that you think works. And then bring it down. Hold it. Try and get it vertical. And then I guess we need to start bringing it in so it lines up over here. Roughly speaking anyway. Circle it back so it goes back to the beginning of that line. Just blot it in here, and that should enable us to flood fill. I mean, these little extras to this building, you don't need to worry too much. If it's a little bit different than mine, doesn't matter. It's kind of functioning largely as a silhouette anyway, so don't worry. Just adding a little bit that sticks out there, some irregular tiles. Just untidy that wall again. I think with layers 8 and 7, perhaps we could merge them together. So layer 8, tap on it and merge down. So layers 7 and 8 are both on one layer. I'm going to create a new layer above that. So now we've got a new layer 8. I'm going to go in with the medium hard brush still, 1% size, 100% opacity. And because the layer, we haven't turned down the strength of that on the N, it's going to appear a little bit darker. Therefore, we'll see it. And I think I'm going to add a little bit of a section here. So from the house, draw a line to about here. And then I'm going to have it kind of sloping down like this. Join it in over here. And then we can fill it in. Again, the neatness of this is not really that relevant. Have it going off the edge of the canvas perhaps. Make sure it's at 100%. I think it was just shy of that. I could see it as a slightly translucent layer. And then perhaps in this section, we could do a kind of like a fence. A very rundown one though, so really quite low on the 1%, 100% opacity. Maybe just a line across here, and then some lines that jut up, kind of join it together. You can see it's really quite rough, and I'm absolutely fine with that. Keep them quite random. Maybe we could vary it a little bit in terms of thickness, so just higher on the 1%. Get some posts that are just a little bit firmer in places. We really want this to look very dilapidated, very neglected. A couple of posts here, a couple of anomalies couple of things that just go off the edge. Maybe in this area we could have something more organic, so we can go to the organic rainforest brush, 100% opacity, and just in the 1% size, and just add some things perhaps are just growing in this area. Don't need to do too much of that, just a little hint of it. It'll be more apparent later on when we add some details to that layer in the background. So come over at this side, perhaps we can add more of that over here. Turn it up a little bit, more over at this side. Come over to this side, back to the airbrushing medium hard brush, 1% size, 100% opacity still. And I want to create a little lean-to, maybe a little section where you can moor a little boat. So we'll do a line across, and then I'm just going to do a little line pitched up and then across again. Just fill it in. Everything's a bit wonky, and then a line down, perhaps, and then across. And I'm really not overly fussed about how neat it is at all. As you can see, line down, another line down. Maybe do 4 of them. Turn the size up a little bit higher on the 1% and just go over them. Perhaps they need to be a little bit sturdier than that. That helps make them a little bit more solid by going over them a second time. Then we'll just do a line that cuts across. Need a bit of a platform. And honestly, I don't know about the structure of these things, so I'm just going to make up some lines that kind of start to resemble a structure. I'm not really overly bothered. It could be completely run down and non-functional now anyway. So whatever it started as, it isn't that anymore. So just do some lines. It's just suggestive, really. Something like that. Maybe just get to this point and just add some anomalies, little blobs, little things that stick up. Now, I actually think that needs to be bigger. So I'm going to go to the selection, freehand, just grab that particular detail, close the loop, transform, freeform, make it taller, extend it this way too. Let's just move it there. I think I'm happy with that. There's a couple of little anomalies there. Just go in with the eraser, just removes that. I think overall I'm happier with that. We can do some fine tuning as we go along anyway. We're going to have a tree that obstructs and obscures some of that too. Now there's just enough difference between the opacity of some of these layers to still note and see some of the separation and difference, and that is what we're going for. So I'm going to start with the layer 7, tap on it and put on the alpha lock, and then I'm going to change brush. I'm going to go to the industrial stone wall brush. I'm going to go for some suitable colors. I'm going to go for the 5th color on the middle row, 2% size, 20% opacity. I'm going to just aim for below this point. We've got a little bit of a shape there, so we want underneath in this area, tap in a little bit of this texture in this lower section. Just be quite rough and random with it, it's fine. And that's brought some nice texture into that area. I'm going to go for maybe this section. So we've got the edge of a roof there, so we'll just go in this bit, just there, just a little bit. Again, it's just starting to bring out some separation of areas. Now I'm going to go to the layer with house on it. I'm actually going to put that up to the very top. So grab it, drag it up to the very top, tap on it and put on the alpha lock. And now I'm going to go in with the heavy metal brush, still with the 5th color on the middle row, 5% size, 20% strength. And I'm just going to start circling in some of this texture. Pressing on a bit more in some areas and some places. Now, when I get to the roof, I don't want to go up to the very edge of that. I need that to stay dark. So just go close to it, but not all the way. So like that, just shy of that edge. I'm going to add some windows and things in here as well. And then as it gets down, just leave these corners a little bit dark, but bring it down in the middle a little bit. Then I'm just going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur. Just blur that in a little bit. I don't want it too distinct, so maybe 2%. Not yet anyway. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to go in still with the heavy metal brush. I'm going to go in with the 6th color this time. 3% size. Still at 20% strength. And again, zoom in a little bit, you can see it. We're going to add this texture in there. We want this front part of the structure to be the most prominent. So the lightest kind of colors here on our building. Just circling it in. Quite a nice texture, I think. Again, just stop shy of that edge. We haven't got the alpha lock on, so just be mindful near the edge. Just don't want to be too rough. Perhaps you could turn it down 2% just when you get to that edge. Just be mindful of that. You can use that as a useful way of just adding smaller textures in there as well. That's starting to bring out a nice quality. Perhaps we ought to create a new layer, layer 10. We'll go in with a dark color. So we'll go in with the force color on the middle row. Go in with the airbrushing medium hard brush, 1% size, 100% opacity. And well, I'm going to do a window just about upwards from halfway. We'll do a rectangle as best you can. Hold it till it snaps. Tap on that arrow, put it to rectangle. It should make it more perfect. It's still a bit wonky, but that's fine. We go to the transform, keep it on uniform and just rotate it so it's slightly less wonky like that. Drag to flood fill. And then I think I'd like to do a line just across from there to there as an arc. At the top of that is like an arch shape. Put it low on the 1%. And I think I'd like to create another line. So I'm going to turn that down this time to about 40% opacity. So I'd like to do a line above there for the arch. Hold it till it snaps, just get it. And maybe a line that just comes down as well. Till it snaps. A line across till it snaps. And then a line up until it snaps. I think what I could do with that layer is just slide and duplicate it. Transform and move it. Let's just move our canvas. We've got two of them. Deselect. It's made our life easier. We've got two windows for the price of one. We'll tap on those. Top one, merge down. So now they're on one layer. Create a new layer, layer 11. I'll zoom in and create another little rectangle here. Very rough. Tap on a little arrow. Don't care if it's not quite as precise on this one. Maybe another rectangle over here. Fill it in. Doesn't have to be the neatest rectangle you've ever seen, and that's fine. Maybe another one over in this area, but you're barely going to see it, and we're going to obscure it anyway. But let's just put the suggestion of it in there anyway. Tap on it and merge down. So all those windows are on one layer now. That just makes life a bit easier. I'm going to create a new layer. Again, another layer 11. I'm going to go perhaps to the fifth color on the middle row. Go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing, 1% size, 20% strength. And we're just going to add some dashes across here to kind of very loosely, very roughly represent the tiles. Just dashes. We want to join up with that line. Perhaps we'll start with that line even. I don't want these to be perfectly neat at all. That's enough. Just a suggestion of some over on this one as well. Perhaps we'll turn it down a little bit more. Lower on the 1%. Like so. Now we've got this area. And just some dashes. Make sure to leave the gaps more, quite prominent as well. Leave a little bit for gaps for the shadow. And then we've got another section here. We can start to add some in there. As it fizzles out after a point. Perhaps we're going to have bits that are missing and you can just start to see the beams of wood. Remember, this is not really something that ordinarily would be lived in. Not by normal people, anyway, shall we say. Now, this is sort of like a creepy building, so it looks for all the world like it's completely abandoned. But then we're going to make it look really strange and eerie as we go later on. Some dashes across for the top of that surface too. So I'm going to stay on this same layer. I'm going to go to the fourth color on the middle row. 1% size, maybe 60% strength. Across, just underneath that top window, I'm going to do a very broken line that cuts across. Maybe a couple of lines. Create that separation. I'm going to have some markings. Again, more decay, more deterioration. Some lines that are just dragging down from that line as well. Quite a few of them perhaps. Just dragging down. It's all about it deteriorating, becoming more and more dilapidated, more and more decay. It really adds to the eerie character of this. Maybe some more just midway. Taps, random blobs, up and down. Wear and tear on this building. Again, this is not really somewhere you're going to want to rent out as an Airbnb. This is not something that's going to be appealing as a residence anymore. Ordinarily, I would say. Maybe a line that cuts across, something that juts out. Again, we're just kind of making this up as we go along a little bit. Things that come down from that line, textures. Perhaps we could even go in with the industrial, heavy metal, 1% size, 60% strength on that one. And we can do basically the same thing, but it's still already a little bit more broken and disjointed. It makes our life a little bit easier. Has more texture already built in, which is perfect. Building some of these textures. It's working nicely. Down from this top edge. Move over here. And that cuts across. Maybe restate that beam up here and here. That's starting to look quite nice, I think. Well, nice isn't perhaps the right word, but I'm quite pleased with the texture anyway. Suitably creepy, I should say, really, shouldn't I? 2% size. Bring some of that into this shadowy part. Just break up some of this texture. Maybe underneath the bit of the roof here, a bit darker in this section. Merge down with that window that we added, but again, I did say it was going to become slightly less apparent in the shadow. Circle this in. Again, the kind of scruffiness of this actually adds to the effect quite nicely anyway, so don't worry too much. Again, that's starting to really look creepy. I really like that effect. It's exactly what we want. I'm going to stay on the same layer. I'm going to go for perhaps the 7th color on the middle row. 1% size, 70% strength now. Maybe 1 or 2 of the tiles. Just catch the light a little bit more. Just glimmer in the light. Just a hint, touch more. Maybe a little cluster of them here. I think you need to add that variation. It really brings out the texture, makes it more apparent to you. Add some more over here. Again, just randomly a few. I'm going to add even more mist on this scene anyway, just to really add the atmosphere. But I think some of these tiles should just catch the light a little bit more distinctly. I think that works well for us. Perhaps the top edge of some of this. Even some of these. I'm going to go back to the house layer. I'm going to tap on it and turn off the alpha lock. I'm going to go in with the 4th color on the middle row. Back in with the airbrushing. Go for the medium brush. 1% size. 100% opacity. And this roof needs the suggestion of tiles. So almost like a little stepped look. Just kicks out like this. We don't want a straight line for that at all. These little details like this really do make the world of difference to the overall look. Pulls it together much better. And I think we're at a stage with the overall look of that I can actually merge some of these layers together. So we can probably take a vast chunk of these and merge them. So we can take from layers 7 all the way to layer 11 and pinch them together. Now that's on one layer. I'm going to slide and duplicate it. On one of those versions, I'm just going to go to the transform, flip it vertically and just drag it down so that it lines up. And with the alpha lock off, we can go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur first. I'm just going to blur it in to the side about 5%. Deselect, then select it again. Motion blur and perhaps just downwards, about 40%. Deselect. On this layer, perhaps we'll go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing, 4th color on the middle row, 5% size, 60% strength, and we'll just shut down the separation there. This region to begin with. Just join them together. Perhaps we'll turn it down even more. 30% strength or so, 3% size. And then again, just over in this bit, be a bit more careful. Do kind of lines that cut across. Run with the horizontal a little bit more. Perhaps turn it down even more. 2%. Some lines that cut across there. We don't want them to go too far. Starting to build in beginnings of ripples in the water, that kind of effect, just some lines that cut across. Very roughly, loosely to begin with, but a little can go a long way. Press lightly. That's already starting to work quite nicely. Go to my layers, create a new layer, layer 8. I'm going to do a more prominent tree. I'm going to go in with the inking studio pen. 10% size, 100% opacity. maybe in and amongst here. And we are still on the fourth color on the middle row. I'll just zoom out so we get the positioning and scale right. I want it to be probably the highest tree. I'm going to start high up compared to the other ones. Press lightly. As it comes down, you can press more and have it join in kind of in this area. Another shorter one, press lightly and bow in just so it clips the edge maybe like that. Again, it's a bit wobbly, but you can go in and fine tune that if you feel it needs it. And by the time we add branches to it anyway, it will be less so. I'm probably going to go to the different brushes. I might start with the organic rainforest brush. I might just like a slightly lighter color. So I'm going to go for the second color on the middle row. Same settings as before in terms of spacing. So 1% size and 70% strength. And I'm just going to start adding these textures to begin with. Again, these trees are going to be significantly more noticed and more noticeable compared to the others. So we need to spend a little bit longer on these textures, a bit more care. So use this brush at the top and we're going to get a kind of sweeping down look like this kind of thing, but not quite that neat and not quite that obvious. Yeah, that kind of look anyway, that kind of effect. But it's not as straight lines. It can be as circles and squiggles, and some bits of the tree, again, just like we did before, can leave quite sparse. Doesn't need to be completely consistent all over. That's working quite nicely, I think. And then for this other one, perhaps we'll just turn the opacity down even more, 50%. Just get some sense of it in there anyway. Then we can go back to the inking studio pen, go back to the dark color, the fourth color on the middle row. Same settings before, except maybe lower opacity, so maybe 50% opacity. Zoom in. We can just use some of these branches, probably a smaller size actually, maybe 5% size. And we can just join up some of these branches in and amongst this kind of foliage. A general downwards movement, I think. Zooming out, checking it. How's it working? Maybe some branches that are growing upwards from lower down as well. Perhaps turn it up a little bit again. 70% strength. Some organic things from down here, just at the edges. Turn it down even more. 3%. Again, we can switch to the organic rainforest brush. I'm not going to change color this time, just to add it in the mix. Perhaps we'll put that to 100% opacity, add it in the mix. So it's not just fine twigs, it can be just blocking it in there a little bit more as well, around that edge. Inking studio pen, and this tree is lacking a few branches. So just carefully add a few in. You don't need to add too many necessarily, just a suggestion. These are all going to be pointing upwards, slightly different look for this tree. Just like we've got some of them in the background too. For the sake of efficiency, I'm doing this fairly quickly. So if you want to spend longer on yours, then I do encourage that, please do. These are on a separate layer. I'm going to go to the adjustments, motion blur, and just ever so slightly, maybe 5% just to the side, just softens them in slightly. Might just tap on that layer, put on the alpha lock, go in with the airbrushing soft brush, go in with the fourth color, the black, 4% size, 20% strength, and I'm just gonna go over it a little bit, use it a chance to darken them up slightly, not too much. I think that works. I think that might be a little bit too dark in that area now. Maybe just delete that. 2 fingers back, we'll get rid of that, and that's settled in a bit better. I think I'd like to add another chimney there actually. It just cuts into the moon area. So we'll do it on the house layer. Perhaps we'll actually do it underneath. So from layer 6, we'll create a new layer. Go in with the medium brush with an, in fact, no, the medium hard brush with an airbrushing. Go perhaps there's a lighter color. So we'll go second color on the middle row. Just to judge this, it goes up, down here. Again, that's an awful shape, but it doesn't really matter. you go on the editing of it, you can just pinch it in and rearrange it so you're happier with it. Color it in. This is really a strong silhouette on that moon. So I'm going to zoom in, just add a little bit of a line like this, a line that cuts across, a bit that sticks out there, that's fine. Something like this, just the right kind of angles, a little bit of a collar to it, something like that. Perhaps it's a little bit tall. Transform, freeform, nudge it down slightly. I'm going to add a glow to this window. So I'm going to go to the top layer, create a new layer, go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to go to the first color on the bottom row, and I'm going to put it to 1% size, 20% strength. I'm just going to, within that area, just create a warmer section like that. Like I was saying, this is definitely not the place that anyone would want to go and stay, and certainly not live, which is why it's extra strange that we have this glowing area, which makes it all the creepier, I think. Just circle this lighter color in now, which is the second color on the bottom row. Don't need to do too much of it. I'm going to create a new layer, change the blend mode, tap on the N, scroll down to add, go back to the first color and tap a bit more of that in. What size are we on? Let's put it up to 2%. Tap that in a little bit more. Then maybe go to the second color, turn it down a little bit, 1%, just a few touches of that. Make it glow a little bit more. It's not going to be an inviting light as such because of the context and everything else, but I do want it to glow a little bit more, have a little warmth, but not in an entirely friendly way. I think something a bit too creepy about it. The fifth color, the yellow, just a couple of touches of that, very lightly. Then a layer above that, layer 11, we're going to go in with the fourth color on the middle row, still with a soft brush, really low on the 1% size, 100% opacity. We're just going to create some lines that cut up, hold it. Perhaps I need to do that into more equal thirds actually, so just a little bit long more. If you're struggling to get that, transform, just move it, then another one, something like this. And then we're going to do lines across from one side to the other, hold it until it snaps. I'm going to use the finger down technique just to get them horizontal, across, finger down, across, hold it, finger down, and then one last time like that. And I think that's suitably creepy. I might just go back to layer 10, slide and duplicate it. It is a bit too strong, so the top version, tap on the A and just dial that back somewhere between none and 100, perhaps even the 50%. Let's go right for the center, pushes it a little bit further, like that. Tap on it and merge down so it's on one layer. Now we just need to have more reflection in the water of our different lights. So I'm going to go to the top, create a new layer, layer 12. I'm going to go in with probably the second color on the middle row and the soft brush with an airbrushing, 3% size, 20% strength or so. Just tap a little area here to reflect the window. Don't want to go over that too much. Just lightly press that in, but very lightly. In fact, I'm going to go to the yellow color, turn that down even more, 5%. Just add a bit of that influence in there as well. We're going to get almost like a greening effect. So we've got the color of the water with the light mixing together and it creates almost like a green look. Create a new layer, tap on the N, change it to add, going with the soft brush still, going with the second color on the bottom row, really low on the 1%, maybe 30% strength. And we're kind of reflecting these. So we could have dashes that come down and we could do it in thirds, I suppose, to represent kind of separation of the window as well, a little bit like that. So that kind of makes sense for that. But after a point, they're just going to start merging together. And then the lines are going to get further apart and less, something like this. That's only a starting point. We're going to keep going over it and building them up. Once we've got them in place, roughly speaking, anyway, we can start to just ramp them up a little bit, make them a bit more prominent. So we'll move along to the second color on the bottom row, continue that idea. Tap in there a few times. Again, that's on a separate layer, so we can go to the adjustments, the motion blur, just to the side slightly, about 15%, and deselect. And that's kind of created a nice effect. We can go to that layer, slide and duplicate it to ramp it up. Again, that's a bit too bright, so the top version, tap on the A. So I've got an option between none and 100. I think about 30% added to that works for the window. Perhaps we can just extend its impact a little bit more, just in one or two places it comes further down, but not too much. I'm going to put the percentage up, 60%. Perhaps I need to go back to layer 13 underneath to really see that. Which, this is all working nicely, but we definitely need to reflect the moon in the water. So perhaps we can slide and duplicate that moon. One of the versions, we're going to go transform, move it into this area, roughly where it should be. Try and position it like so. Then we're going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and blur that in to about the 30%. Deselect, and then I'm going to slide and duplicate that layer and duplicate it again. And then I can just pinch all those layer 4s together. That works. And we've got a suitable glow down in that lower area. I'm going to go to the top, create a new layer, layer 16. I'm going to go in with the second color on the middle row. Soft brush, 2% size, 10% strength. And well, we're going to have some lines that cut in from the sides, some ripples in the water. Try and do them kind of long sweeps that cut across. I think that can be quite effective. Tricky to do. Go over the reflection, keep building it up. Go to the adjustments, the motion blur, and slide it to the side. And that should just flatten out a little bit. Go in again with a soft brush, maybe a bigger soft brush this time, 10%, 10% strength, and just shut down from the edges some of this light. In fact, the reflection of the building should just start to be blended out a little bit. Shouldn't really be that obvious. And in the corners, perhaps, shut down some of the light there. Make it a bit darker. In fact, I'm going to go back to layer 7, turn off the alpha lock. I'm going to go in with the adjustments, liquefy on the push, down at 8% size, max pressure. And I'm just going to push this around. Perhaps I'll go even bigger actually. Let's go up to 11%, or above 10% anyway. And you can start to introduce some ripples here. You can see that effect is working quite nicely. Push it. Let's put it up. 20%. As it gets closer to it, that's too much. But think about it carefully. As it comes closer to us, you're going to get more of that anyway. Certainly. That can work quite nicely. Deselect. Back to the very top. We'll go to layer 13, in fact. That's quite a good layer to use. We'll go in with the second color on the bottom row. Soft brush, 2% size, 20% strength. And perhaps we can just go in there, perhaps a higher percent strength actually, 50%. We can just introduce some of this light. Perhaps the moon is just rippling on the water quite nicely, like that. I think I'd like to go across the whole scene generally, so I'm going to go to the top layer, layer 17. On this layer, I'm going to go in with the first color on the top row. I'm going to go in with the elements, clouds brush, 10% size, 20% strength, and we're just going to introduce more of this kind of low-lying mist, perhaps, just in places to obscure sections. So maybe the top up here, perhaps, just a bit more obscuring of that top edge, mist that cuts across, low-lying mist down here. I don't know, you build in the atmosphere, I think. And up here, maybe we'll go for the third color. Maybe just add a bit more of that illumination around nearly said the sun then. I think it's probably a moon, but I don't know. I haven't yet decided really, even myself. We'll go to layer 13. We'll stay with the third color, stay with this brush, 2% size, 20% strength. And I just want to create a little section there where it's extra bright, just to really contrast. I think it needs just that little bit of sharpness of light. Not too much, just a little bit. I think I want to go back to layer 7, which is the main building. Go in with the 6 color on the middle row, and still using the heavy metal brush, 3% size, maybe 20% strength. Just want to bring out the light of this a little bit more. Not massively more, just a bit, just in one or two places. I think it needs to just jump out a little bit compared to the other areas. Back in these areas. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I could endlessly fiddle with this. I will refine this a little bit further over at my Patreon. So if you want to be involved in that, then head over to my Patreon. There is a link for that down in the description, as explained before. If you've enjoyed this, please hit subscribe and join me next week for another tutorial. Bye for now.